Attention has a strange weakness. The moment people become certain that they can always reach you, your presence can begin to feel ordinary. Your messages become expected. Your reactions become predictable. Your availability becomes part of the background. Then one day you change the pattern. You stop chasing. You stop sending another message when the first one receives no response. You stop explaining every decision. You stop checking whether someone still approves of you. You become quieter, calmer, and more focused on your own life. Suddenly, the same person who barely noticed your attention begins noticing your absence. This is where human psychology becomes far more interesting than the simple advice to ignore people. The real question is why a change in attention can alter perception so quickly. Why can distance create curiosity? Why can reduced availability make a person seem more valuable? And why does emotional self-control often create a stronger impression than constant communication ever could? The answer begins with one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. Attention follows change. The mind becomes especially sensitive when a familiar pattern suddenly breaks. When someone has always been available, their availability becomes predictable. The brain has little reason to spend extra mental energy analyzing it. But when that pattern changes, uncertainty enters the picture. Questions begin forming. Did their feelings change? Are they becoming more independent? Are they focused on something else? Did I take their attention for granted? That mental activity can make a person more noticeable, even when they are doing less than before. But there is an important distinction that most advice about attraction completely misses. Ignoring people as a tactic is very different from becoming less dependent on their attention. One is a game, the other is personal growth. One tries to control another person's emotions. The other gives you control over your own emotions. And that difference will shape everything we discuss in this video. Because the most attractive form of distance does not come from pretending to be busy, deliberately leaving messages unanswered, or trying to make someone jealous. It comes from having a life that does not collapse when another person stops paying attention to you. It comes from being able to sit with uncertainty without immediately reacting. It comes from understanding that your attention is valuable because your time is valuable. Every time you give someone your attention, you are giving away a small part of your limited life. When you begin treating that attention with more care, your relationships can change in ways you may never have expected. In this video, you will learn why constant availability can reduce the psychological impact of your presence, how uncertainty captures attention, why people can become more aware of you when your behavior changes, and how perceived scarcity influences the way people evaluate access to you. You will also learn why emotional regulation is far more powerful than silent treatment, why stopping the chase can reveal the true structure of a relationship, and how selective attention can create respect without turning relationships into psychological games. We will explore the difference between healthy distance manipulation, because this distinction matters. Deliberately ignoring someone to create anxiety can damage trust and create emotional pain. Creating healthy boundaries because you respect your own time is completely different. One behavior is designed to control another person. The other is designed to control yourself. That difference can completely change the meaning of silence. There is also a lesser-known side to this psychology. When people experience social exclusion or a sudden loss of attention, the effect can reach deeper than simple curiosity. Social connection is closely connected to feelings of belonging, self-worth, control, and certainty. When a familiar interaction disappears, the mind can begin searching for an explanation. That search can increase mental focus on the person involved. In other words, the person who becomes less available may occupy more mental space precisely because their behavior has become harder to predict. But this does not mean that every person who ignores you secretly wants you more. It does not mean distance creates attraction from nothing. It means changes in social patterns can influence attention and perception. This is why you must understand the psychology instead of copying surface-level tricks. If you simply start ignoring everyone, you may become distant rather than attractive. If you start playing games, people may recognize the manipulation. If you suddenly disappear because you want someone to chase you, you may create insecurity rather than genuine respect. The deeper principle is much more powerful. Become less dependent on being noticed. Become more selective with your attention. Learn to respond instead of react. Build a life that gives you reasons to focus elsewhere. When your confidence comes from within, your behavior changes naturally. You no longer need to manufacture mystery because you have boundaries. You no longer need to pretend to be unavailable because your time already has value. You no longer need to chase because rejection no longer threatens your identity. This is where the psychology of attraction becomes connected to emotional independence. A person who needs constant validation can be trapped in a cycle. They send a message and wait. They check their phone. They analyze the response. They wonder why the reply was shorter. They send another message. They explain themselves. They try harder. Each attempt to gain reassurance can create even more emotional dependence. The opposite pattern creates stability. You communicate clearly. You give people space. You continue living your life. You allow their behavior to provide information, instead of treating every interaction as a test of your worth. That calmness can change how others experience you. Your presence becomes less predictable, but your character becomes more consistent. You are still respectful. You are still warm. You are still capable of caring deeply. You simply refuse to abandon yourself to maintain someone's attention. And this is where we will uncover one of the most important ideas in the entire video. The goal is never to make people afraid of losing you. The goal is to become comfortable with the possibility that some people will leave. Once you reach that point, your behavior becomes harder to manipulate. You stop begging for attention. You stop over-explaining. You stop rewarding disrespect with endless access. You begin choosing where your energy belongs. That choice can create a powerful psychological signal. It tells people that your attention is given deliberately rather than automatically. And when attention becomes selective, it can feel more meaningful. So stay until the end, because we are going to break down exactly how this works, why uncertainty can pull attention toward a person, why reduced availability can change perceived value, how emotional self-control affects attraction, and where the line exists between healthy distance and emotional manipulation. By the end, you will understand why the strongest version of this principle has very little to do with ignoring people at all. It is about becoming someone who can give attention without becoming dependent on receiving it back. That is the difference between playing with attention and mastering it. And once you understand that difference, you can stop chasing the psychology of being wanted and start building the psychology of being genuinely valuable. Welcome to our channel, where we explore human psychology, emotional behavior, relationships, and the hidden patterns that shape the way people think and respond. If you enjoy learning the deeper reasons behind everyday human behavior, subscribe to the channel and stay with us, because the next part takes us deeper into why people often notice what they once took for granted. Human attention becomes sharper when access to something begins to feel uncertain. This is one of the quieter forces behind attraction, relationships, and social behavior. When a person believes your attention is guaranteed, there is little reason for them to think deeply about it. Your messages arrive. Your support is available. Your reactions are familiar. Your presence feels stable. Because it feels stable, the brain can begin treating it as part of the normal environment. This does not mean the person has stopped caring. It means predictability reduces urgency. The mind gives greater attention to changes than to patterns that remain the same. That is why a sudden change in availability can create a very different psychological response. The person who once assumed you would always be there may suddenly become more aware of your presence when that certainty begins to disappear. A message that once felt ordinary can suddenly feel important. A conversation that once seemed routine can suddenly feel unfinished. A person who was always within reach can suddenly occupy more mental space simply because their availability has changed. This connects to a broader psychological pattern involving loss and threatened social connection. People tend to respond strongly when they sense that something valuable may become unavailable. The potential loss can create more urgency than ordinary access ever created. Think about the difference between knowing you can reach someone whenever you want and realizing that you may no longer have the same access to them. The person has not necessarily changed in value overnight. Your perception of the situation has changed. Certainty has been replaced by possibility. Possibility creates questions. Questions create attention. Attention creates mental focus. This is one reason reduced availability can sometimes change how a person is perceived. The important word here is sometimes, because distance alone does not create genuine attraction. It can reveal value that was previously taken for granted, but it can also reveal that the connection was weak in the first place. This is where many people misunderstand the psychology and turn a useful principle into a manipulation tactic. They think the answer is to ignore someone deliberately. They believe delayed responses, cold behavior, and sudden disappearance will automatically make another person chase them. Human psychology is more complicated than that. Deliberate emotional withdrawal can create anxiety, resentment, confusion, or emotional distance. Research on ostracism has shown that being ignored or excluded can affect important psychological needs, including belonging, self-esteem, control, and the feeling that one's existence matters. Social connection is deeply important to the human mind. When that connection feels threatened, people can experience a strong emotional response. This is why healthy distance and manipulative ignoring must be separated completely. Healthy distance communicates, "I have my own life." Manipulative ignoring communicates, "I want you to feel uncomfortable because I am withholding access." The outward behavior may look similar for a moment, but the psychological intention is completely different. A person who is genuinely busy with their own goals may respond later because their attention is somewhere else. A person using silence as punishment may deliberately wait because they want the other person to become anxious. One comes from independence, the other comes from control. One can create respect because it demonstrates emotional stability. The other can destroy trust because it creates insecurity. This distinction becomes even more important when we understand how people respond to threatened belonging. When someone feels that an important connection is becoming uncertain, the mind may begin looking for ways to restore stability. They may seek reassurance. They may initiate contact. They may become more attentive. They may analyze recent conversations. They may replay small moments and search for an explanation. The person who was once receiving attention without thinking about it may suddenly become focused on why that attention has changed. This does not automatically mean romantic attraction. It means the social situation has become psychologically important. A threatened connection can demand attention because the mind wants to understand what is happening and whether the relationship can return to its previous state. That is why the loss of access can sometimes make people recognize the value of access. When something is always available, it can be easy to overlook its importance. When availability becomes uncertain, its importance can become more visible. The same principle appears in everyday relationships. Someone calls every day, and the calls become routine. Someone is always ready to help, and the help becomes expected. Someone constantly checks in, and the messages become part of the daily rhythm. Then that person becomes less available. Suddenly, the absence becomes noticeable. The unanswered expectation creates a gap. The mind notices the gap because there used to be something there. This is where perceived value can shift. The value may have existed all along, but constant availability made it easy to overlook. Reduced access can force the other person to recognize what was previously taken for granted. Yet there is another side to this principle. If a person has been consistently disrespectful, withdrawing your attention may simply protect your peace. You are no longer trying to trigger a reaction. You are responding to a pattern. That is emotional independence. You recognize that your time, attention, and emotional energy have limits. You decide where those resources belong. You do not need to announce your withdrawal dramatically. You do not need to make the other person jealous. You do not need to create a performance around your absence. You simply stop giving unlimited access to someone who repeatedly treats that access as worthless. This can change the relationship dynamic because your attention is no longer automatic. It becomes something you choose. And chosen attention often feels more meaningful than attention that is given without thought. When someone knows you will respond regardless of how they behave, they have little reason to consider the consequences of their behavior. When they understand that your presence depends on mutual respect, the relationship becomes more balanced. This is where lost sensitivity becomes relevant. The possibility of losing access can make people pay closer attention to what they currently have. The possibility of losing a connection can make that connection feel more psychologically important. But the strongest version of this principle is rarely about making someone afraid. It is about refusing to make your own identity dependent on being wanted. When you can walk away without trying to punish anyone, your distance carries a different meaning. You are no longer saying, "Chase me." You are saying, "My life continues." That mindset changes how you communicate, how you respond, and how you handle uncertainty. You can care about someone without constantly pursuing them. You can value a relationship without sacrificing your self-respect. You can give someone attention without giving them complete control over your emotional state. And when that balance exists, people may begin to experience your attention differently because they understand that it is given freely rather than demanded. The moment attention becomes a choice instead of a need, access becomes more meaningful, and the person receiving it may begin to recognize its value in a way they never had to consider before. Constant attention can slowly remove one of the most powerful elements in human attraction: uncertainty. When someone knows exactly how you will behave, there is very little left for the mind to explore. You respond immediately every time. You check in throughout the day. You explain every decision. You make sure the other person knows exactly how you feel. You notice every small change in their behavior and react to it. You become available whenever they need you. At first, this can feel caring and reassuring, but over time, predictability can change the way your presence is perceived. The other person no longer has to wonder whether you will respond because they already know the answer. They do not have to wonder whether you care, because your behavior constantly confirms it. They do not have to wonder where your attention is, because you repeatedly give it to them. There is comfort in this, but comfort and attraction are different psychological experiences. A relationship needs trust and stability, but attraction can also be influenced by curiosity, novelty, independence, and the sense that another person has a world of their own. When everything about your behavior becomes predictable, curiosity has less room to operate. The brain becomes familiar with the pattern. Familiarity can create comfort, but excessive predictability can also make interactions feel routine. This is why someone can be deeply available and still feel strangely easy to overlook. Their attention is always present, so it stops feeling special. Their messages become expected. Their compliments become expected. Their support becomes expected. Their presence becomes part of the normal rhythm of the other person's life. The problem is rarely that they cared too much. The problem is that they may have made their attention automatic. There is a major difference between being caring and being constantly available. Caring means you give attention because you genuinely want to. Constant availability can mean you give attention because you are afraid of losing someone. That difference changes the emotional signal. When someone constantly seeks approval, they may unintentionally communicate that the other person's response determines their emotional state. A delayed reply creates anxiety. A short message creates overthinking. A change in tone creates fear. Then the person tries to repair the uncertainty by sending another message, giving another explanation, or offering even more attention. This creates a cycle where insecurity produces more availability, and more availability creates even greater predictability. The person becomes easier to read because they are always trying to prove that they care. Selective availability breaks this pattern without requiring manipulation. It means your time has structure. You have responsibilities. You have interests. You have goals. You have people and activities outside one relationship. You can care deeply about someone while still having a life that continues when they are busy, distracted, or unavailable. Your message may come later because you were working. You may decline a conversation because you need rest. You may choose to focus on a personal goal instead of checking whether someone has replied. These small choices communicate a powerful idea. My life continues whether you're paying attention or you are not. That signal can feel attractive because it suggests independence. Independence tells the other person that your identity does not depend entirely on their approval. You are capable of connection without becoming consumed by it. You can enjoy someone's presence without becoming desperate for it. You can miss someone without abandoning your own routine. This creates a healthier form of mystery. You become interesting because there is more to your life than the relationship itself. There are parts of your world that exist without being constantly explained. You do not need to report every activity. You do not need to prove where you are. You do not need to fill every silence with information. You allow conversations to breathe. You allow people to discover you gradually. This is very different from deliberately hiding information. Healthy mystery is not deception. It is simply the natural result of having depth. A person with goals, interests, friendships, responsibilities, values, and personal ambitions will naturally have a life that cannot be summarized in every conversation. That creates room for curiosity without creating confusion. Deliberate mystery, on the other hand, can become a performance. Someone may intentionally disappear for hours, pretend to be busy, post things to provoke jealousy, or withhold information just to create a reaction. That can create temporary curiosity, but it can also create distrust. Once people realize they are being manipulated, the psychological effect can reverse. Instead of thinking, this person has an interesting life, they may think, this person is trying to control my attention. Real independence requires far less effort. You do not need complicated strategies when you genuinely have priorities. You simply stop making another person's attention the center of your schedule. This also changes the quality of your conversations. When you are constantly trying to keep someone's attention, you may talk too much. You explain points that did not require explanations. You answer questions they never asked. You reveal feelings before the relationship has developed enough to support them. You fill silence because silence makes you uncomfortable. But when you are comfortable with your own presence, you become more measured. You can say what you mean and allow the other person to respond. You do not need to force every interaction toward a particular outcome. That emotional control can create a stronger impression because it shows that you are comfortable with uncertainty. You do not need immediate reassurance to remain stable. You can tolerate a pause. You can tolerate a delayed response. You can tolerate someone being temporarily distracted without turning it into a personal crisis. This is where predictability and uncertainty meet. Healthy relationships require enough predictability to create trust. People need to know that you are reliable, respectful, and consistent in your character. But your entire schedule, emotional state, and attention do not need to revolve around one person. Your character can be predictable while your availability remains flexible. That combination is powerful. People know what kind of person you are, but they also understand that your attention has boundaries. You are reliable without being constantly accessible. You are warm without being desperate. You are interested without becoming dependent. You are present without making yourself permanently available. That is the difference between creating mystery and playing games. Mystery comes from depth. It comes from having a life that continues beyond the relationship. It comes from allowing people to discover your personality over time rather than giving them every answer immediately. It comes from being comfortable enough with yourself that you do not feel pressured to constantly prove your value. And when someone realizes that your attention is something you choose, rather than something they automatically receive, they may begin to experience that attention differently. A message from you can feel more meaningful because you are not sending messages simply to avoid being forgotten. Your presence can feel stronger because you are present by choice. Your words can carry more weight because you do not bury them under endless explanations. Your silence can feel calmer because it comes from comfort rather than punishment. The goal is never to become difficult to reach just to make someone chase you. The goal is to become a person whose life has enough substance that constant access is unnecessary. When you stop trying to fill every gap, every silence, and every moment with attention, you leave room for curiosity to develop naturally. And that is where the psychology of selective availability becomes much more powerful. Uncertainty has a powerful effect on attention because the human mind prefers answers over unresolved questions. When you know exactly where you stand with someone, there is very little mental work required. You know how they feel. You know how they usually behave. You know when they will respond. You know what their silence means. You know what to expect tomorrow because yesterday followed the same pattern. That certainty can feel comfortable, but it also means the brain has fewer unanswered questions processed. Then a familiar pattern changes. A person who always responded quickly begins taking more time. Someone who constantly checked in becomes quieter. Someone who always explained themselves stops trying to prove their intentions. Suddenly, the mind has a problem to solve. Why did their behavior change? Did their feelings change? Are they becoming more independent? Did something happen? Are they losing interest? Is there another priority in their life? The brain begins searching for explanations because uncertainty creates a gap between what was expected and what is happening now. That gap can capture attention. This is one reason people can become mentally focused on someone who has suddenly become less predictable. The person may be doing less, but the other person's mind may be thinking more. That difference is extremely important. Attention is not always created by more communication. Sometimes attention increases because communication has changed. A predictable pattern requires little analysis. A disrupted pattern requires interpretation. This does not mean uncertainty is always attractive. It means uncertainty can increase mental processing. The emotional result depends on the situation, the relationship, and the meaning attached to the change. If someone suddenly becomes distant after being warm and consistent, the uncertainty may create concern. If someone becomes less available because they are genuinely focused on their life, the same change may create curiosity. If someone uses silence as punishment, it may create anxiety and resentment. The behavior can look similar from the outside, but the psychological experience can be completely different. Recent research gives us an important way to understand this. A 2026 meta-analysis examining ostracism found that being socially excluded significantly reduced people's sense of certainty, both immediately and after a short delay. This matters because certainty is part of how people understand their social world. When someone feels connected, they have a clearer sense of where they stand. When that connection becomes uncertain, the mind may become more focused on the situation. It begins searching for information that can restore a sense of understanding. This can explain why a sudden change in someone's availability can become mentally noticeable. The brain wants to know what changed and why. It wants to close the gap between expectation and reality. That search can keep the person in your thoughts, even when they are physically absent from the interaction. But this is where the psychology needs to be handled carefully. The lesson is not to make people anxious so they become attached to you. Anxiety is not attraction. Emotional discomfort is not love. Confusion is not genuine connection. Creating uncertainty on purpose can damage trust and make people feel emotionally unsafe. The useful principle is much simpler. When your behavior changes naturally because you are becoming more independent, other people may notice difference and spend more mental attention trying to understand it. Your absence becomes information. Your reduced availability becomes a change in the pattern. That change can make your behavior more mentally salient. This is why the person who suddenly stops chasing can sometimes become more noticeable. Before, their behavior gave the other person a clear answer every time. They cared. They were available. They wanted contact. They would continue trying. There was no mystery because every question was answered through behavior. Then the person stops forcing the interaction. They become calmer. They give the other person room. They stop trying to control the outcome. Suddenly, the other person has less information. The mind may begin filling in the missing information with questions. This can increase attention, but it can also expose the truth about the relationship. If the other person genuinely values the connection, they may become more curious and make an effort to understand what changed. If they were only comfortable receiving constant attention, they may become frustrated because the attention has disappeared. If they were already emotionally disconnected, they may simply move forward. Every response provides information. This is why uncertainty can be useful as an observation tool, but dangerous as a manipulation strategy. When you stop over-explaining, you give people room to reveal their own level of interest. When you stop chasing, you can see whether they move toward you voluntarily. When you stop filling every silence, you can observe whether the other person contributes to the relationship. The uncertainty does not create their feelings. It reveals their behavior. This is an important distinction. You are not manufacturing attraction. You are removing the constant reassurance that must have been hiding the natural balance of the relationship. And this is where cognitive attention becomes especially interesting. People tend to notice changes more strongly than stable patterns. A familiar sound can disappear into the background. A sudden new sound can immediately capture attention. A routine conversation can feel ordinary. A sudden change in tone can become memorable. The same basic process can happen in relationships. When someone's behavior has been consistent for a long time, The mind becomes accustomed to it. When the pattern changes, attention can increase because the brain needs to update its understanding. The person becomes more mentally salient because their behavior has become relevant again. This can explain why someone may suddenly think about you after you stop seeking their attention. It is less about a magical attraction formula and more about a change in information. Before, your behavior was easy to predict. Now there is a question mark. That question mark can occupy mental space. The healthiest response is to let that uncertainty exist without trying to control it. You do not need to send another message to remove the discomfort. You do not need to explain yourself repeatedly. You do not need to create a dramatic disappearance. You can simply continue living your life and allow the other person's behavior to unfold. This is emotional regulation in practice. You can care without chasing certainty. You can remain interested without demanding immediate reassurance. You can tolerate a little ambiguity while observing what happens next. And when you become comfortable with that process, something important changes inside you. You stop seeing uncertainty as a threat that must immediately be eliminated. You begin seeing it as information. You allow people to show you what they want instead of constantly telling them what you want. You allow their actions to answer questions that your anxiety once tried to answer for them. That is where uncertainty becomes psychologically powerful. It does not need to be manufactured. It simply needs to be tolerated. Because when you stop rushing to close every unanswered question, the other person's behavior has room to speak, and sometimes the clearest answer comes from what happens when you stop giving them all the answers yourself. There is a noticeable difference between someone who wants connection and someone who needs connection to feel secure. Both people may care deeply. Both may want reassurance. Both may enjoy attention. But the way they respond to uncertainty can reveal a completely different level of emotional independence. When someone constantly needs validation, their behavior can begin to revolve around another person's reactions. A delayed message can change their mood. A short reply can create worry. A missed call can become a reason to overthink. A small change in someone's tone can suddenly feel like evidence that the relationship is falling apart. The person may then seek reassurance immediately. They ask, "Why are you ignoring me?" They ask, "Do you still like me?" They explain themselves. They try to repair a problem that may not even exist. The intention is usually understandable. They want certainty. They want to know that everything is safe. But constant reassurance seeking can create an unintended signal. It can communicate that the other person's attention has a powerful influence over their emotional state. Now compare that with a person who can tolerate silence. They may notice that the reply is late, but they do not immediately create a story around it. They may care some, but they do not panic. They may wonder, but they do not chase an answer before there is enough information. Their response sounds different. Instead of saying, "Why are you ignoring me?" they can say, "I will give you space." Instead of asking, "Do you still like me?" they can think, "I know what I bring to the relationship." That difference is emotional regulation. It does not mean the second person feels nothing. They can feel disappointment. They can feel fear. They can feel uncertainty. They can even feel the desire to reach out. The difference is that the emotion does not automatically control the behavior. They create a small space between what they feel and what they do. That space is where self-control develops. A person who reacts instantly to every uncomfortable emotion becomes easy to influence because other people's behavior can immediately change their actions. A person who can pause before responding becomes harder to destabilize. This does not make them cold. It makes them deliberate. They can ask themselves, "What is actually happening?" before asking, "What am I afraid is happening?" That distinction can completely change the way relationships are experienced. Emotional regulation is often misunderstood as hiding feelings. It is not. Suppressing emotions means pushing feelings down and pretending they do not exist. Regulation means recognizing the emotion, understanding it, and choosing how to respond. You can feel hurt without sending an angry message. You can feel anxious without demanding reassurance. You can feel ignored without immediately trying to regain attention. You can care about someone without abandoning your dignity to keep them close. This is where internal validation becomes important. Internal validation means your sense of worth does not depend entirely on external approval. You can appreciate compliments without needing them to feel valuable. You can enjoy someone's affection without needing it to prove that you matter. You can accept rejection without turning rejection into a verdict on your identity. You understand that another person's preference is information about the relationship, not a final judgment about your worth. That mindset changes the way you communicate. You become less desperate to be understood by everyone. You stop explaining every choice simply because someone disagrees. You stop trying to convince people to see your value. You allow your behavior to speak over time. You become comfortable with the possibility that someone may misunderstand you. This can create a powerful sense of stability. People often notice when someone is emotionally grounded because their behavior remains relatively consistent under pressure. Their mood does not swing dramatically based on every response. They do not become warm when they receive attention and hostile when they do not. They can maintain their standards even when they feel emotionally activated. This is connected to self-efficacy, the belief that you can handle situations and influence your own responses. A person with stronger self-efficacy does not need to believe that everything will go perfectly. They believe they can handle the outcome even when it does not. That is a major psychological shift. Instead of thinking, I need this person to respond so I can feel okay, the mindset becomes, I would like a response, but I can handle waiting. Instead of thinking, I need them to choose me, it becomes, I want mutual interest, and I can walk away from a relationship that does not provide it. Instead of thinking, I need to prove myself, it becomes, my behavior will show who I am over time. That calmness can change how attention works inside a relationship. When someone is constantly seeking validation, every interaction can feel loaded with meaning. A message is never just a message. A delayed response becomes a possible rejection. A compliment becomes proof of worth. A disagreement becomes a threat. This creates emotional pressure for both people. The person seeking reassurance becomes exhausted, and the other person may eventually feel responsible for maintaining their emotional stability. Emotional independence reduces that pressure. You can communicate your needs clearly without demanding that another person regulate your emotions for you. You can say, I value consistency, instead of repeatedly checking whether someone still cares. You can say, I need mutual effort, instead of increasing your own effort whenever there's decreases. You can establish a boundary without turning it into a threat. You can step back without trying to make the other person feel guilty. This is where healthy distance becomes powerful. You are not withdrawing to create fear. You are creating space because you understand that relationships require freedom as well as connection. You are allowing the other person to choose their behavior while you remain responsible for your own. When you stop trying to control another person's reactions, you regain control over your own attention. That can make you feel different because your energy is no longer scattered across endless questions. You become more focused. You listen more carefully. You observe behavior instead of constantly interpreting it through fear. You begin noticing patterns instead of reacting to isolated moments. You can recognize when someone is busy without turning it into rejection. You can recognize genuine distance without trying to force closeness. You can recognize inconsistency without spending weeks trying to explain it away. This creates a different kind of confidence. It is quieter than the confidence that demands attention. It does not need to announce itself. It appears through patience, boundaries, measured communication, and the ability to remain steady when circumstances become uncertain. The person who does not need validation still wants love, friendship, respect, and connection. They simply refuse to make those things the foundation of their identity. Their emotional life has a center that exists beyond another person's approval. And when your center comes from within, your attention becomes a choice rather than a desperate request for reassurance. Your silence becomes comfortable rather than strategic, and your presence begins to carry a different psychological weight because people can sense that you are there because you choose to be there. There is a moment in many relationships when attention stops being mutual and starts becoming a pattern of pursuit. One person reaches out, starts conversations, checks in, makes plans, asks questions, and tries to keep the connection alive. The other person receives that attention. Sometimes they respond warmly. Sometimes they respond inconsistently. Sometimes they give just enough attention to keep the connection moving without making the same level of effort. Over time, a feedback loop can develop. The person who wants the relationship more begins doing more. The more they do, the less the other person has to initiate. The less the other person initiates, the more anxious the first person becomes. Then they increase their effort again. Another message, another invitation, another explanation, another attempt to repair the distance. Without realizing it, they may be training the relationship to depend on their pursuit. Their attention becomes predictable. Their effort becomes automatic. The other person learns that even if they pass passive, the connection will continue because someone else will keep carrying it. This is where reciprocity becomes important. Healthy relationships do not require identical behavior every day, but they generally need mutual investment over time. Both people need to contribute. Both people need reasons to stay engaged. Both people need opportunities to initiate, respond, support, and repair. When one person consistently carries the emotional weight, the relationship can become unbalanced. The problem is rarely solved by simply trying harder. More effort can sometimes make the imbalance stronger, because the person receiving attention has even less reason to change their behavior. Then something different happens. The pursuit stops. There is no dramatic announcement, no angry message, no attempt to make the other person jealous. The person simply stops doing all the work. They stop sending the second message when the first one receives no response. They stop arranging every meeting. They stop explaining their feelings repeatedly. They stop checking whether the other person is still interested. They return their attention to their own life. This changes the feedback loop because the usual source of momentum is gone. Now the relationship has to reveal its natural level of reciprocity. The other person has a choice. They can move closer. They can initiate. They can ask questions. They can make an effort. Or they can remain passive. Either response provides information. This is why stopping the chase can be psychologically powerful without being a manipulation tactic. You are no longer trying to force a result. You are observing what happens when you stop creating the result yourself. That difference matters enormously. If you constantly push a relationship forward, you may never know whether the other person would have moved toward you voluntarily. Your effort can hide their level of interest. Once you step back, the natural pattern becomes easier to see. Someone who genuinely values the connection may notice the change and choose to participate more actively. Someone who is mainly enjoying your attention may become distant when the attention disappears. Someone who is uncertain may finally make a decision. Someone who is simply busy may return when they have more capacity. The point is not to predict which outcome will happen. The point is to allow reality to provide the answer. Distance does not create genuine attraction where none exists. It does not manufacture feelings. It does not turn an uninterested person into a deeply invested partner. It can, however, reveal the existing dynamic, because your constant pursuit is no longer covering it. This is one of the most important principles in the entire psychology of selective availability. When you stop chasing, you are not necessarily becoming more attractive. You are becoming easier to understand. The relationship has fewer artificial signals. You can see who reaches out without being prompted. You can see who remembers you without needing reminders. You can see who makes plans without you organizing everything. You can see who notices your absence. You can see who values the connection enough to participate in maintaining it. These observations can be uncomfortable because they may reveal that the relationship was more one-sided than you wanted to believe. But uncomfortable information can still be valuable information. Before stepping back, you may have been focused on keeping the connection alive. After stepping back, you can begin asking whether the connection is alive on its own. That is a completely different question. It moves your attention away from controlling another person's behavior and toward understanding it. Reciprocity is not about keeping score of every message or counting who initiated last. Human relationships are more complicated than that. People have different schedules, personalities, responsibilities, and emotional needs. One person may naturally communicate more often than another. The deeper issue is the overall pattern. Over weeks and months, does the other person show interest? Do they make room for you? Do they remember important things? Do they initiate sometimes? Do they respond when you express a need? Do they make an effort to repair problems? Do they show appreciation? These behaviors reveal more than any single message. This is why stopping the chase should never become a rigid rule where you refuse to initiate because you want to appear valuable. That simply creates another performance. Healthy reciprocity allows you to reach out because you genuinely want to. The problem begins when you keep reaching out, because you are afraid that the relationship will disappear if you stop. That fear can turn connection into maintenance. You are no longer enjoying the relationship. You are constantly trying to prevent its collapse. Emotional independence gives you another option. You can initiate when it feels natural. You can express interest clearly. You can show affection. Then you can step back and allow the other person to participate. You do not need to keep pushing the door open when they have the ability to walk through it themselves. This also changes the psychological position you occupy in the relationship. When you are constantly chasing, your attention is directed outward. You are watching the other person for signs. When you step back, your attention returns to yourself. You begin noticing your own needs. You begin asking whether the relationship actually fits balance. You start observing whether you feel respected, rather than simply asking whether you are wanted. That shift can create a stronger sense of self-respect. You stop measuring your value by how hard someone makes you work to keep them. You begin measuring the relationship by the quality of mutual effort. And sometimes the most revealing moment comes after the chase ends. The person you thought would never notice your absence reaches out. The person you thought cared deeply does nothing. The person you were constantly trying to impress suddenly realizes they have to participate. Or you realize that the relationship only existed because you were carrying it. Each outcome tells you something about the underlying dynamic. That is the real psychological value of stepping back. You are giving the relationship room to show you what it actually is, rather than constantly forcing it to become what you hope it could be. As the pattern changes, attention changes with it, and the other person's response begins to reveal whether they were responding to you or simply responding to the attention you were providing. Silence can reveal more about a relationship than endless conversation because it removes the reactions that people may have become accustomed to receiving. When someone knows exactly how you usually respond, they can begin forming expectations around your behavior. They know that you will answer. They know that you will explain. They know that you will react when they become distant. They know that if they pull away, you may move closer. They know that if they give you less attention, you may work harder to regain it. Over time, this creates a predictable emotional pattern. Then the pattern changes. You stop reacting in the expected way. You do not immediately respond to every provocation. You do not chase after every withdrawal. You do not rush to repair every moment of tension. You simply become quieter and more emotionally controlled. The reaction that follows can reveal what the previous pattern was actually providing for the other person. Some people suddenly become more interested. They ask questions. They reach out more often. They notice that your behavior has changed and want to understand why. Some become irritated because the emotional response they expected is no longer available. Some try harder to regain your attention. Others simply continue with their lives. Every response provides information, but the information must be interpreted carefully. A reaction does not automatically mean attraction. This is one of the most important distinctions in the psychology of silence. Someone becoming more interested after you stop giving attention does not necessarily mean they have suddenly developed deeper feelings. They simply be reacting to the loss of attention they had become comfortable receiving. They may miss the reassurance. They may miss the compliments. They may miss knowing that you were always available. They may miss the sense of control that came from knowing you would respond whenever they reached out. The behavior can look like attraction from the outside, but the motivation can be very different. This is why observing patterns matters more than reacting to a single moment. Research on social exclusion gives us a useful framework for understanding this. When people face exclusion, their basic psychological needs can feel threatened. Belonging can feel weaker. Control can feel reduced. Self-esteem can be affected. The feeling of having a meaningful place in another person's world can become uncertain. Because these needs are important, people can become motivated to restore them. They may seek connection again. They may attempt to regain social acceptance. They may increase their efforts to reconnect. This helps explain why a sudden change in attention can produce a behavioral response. The brain notices that the social pattern has changed, and the person may attempt to restore the previous level of connection. In ordinary relationships, this can happen without anyone consciously planning it. A person who is accustomed to receiving frequent messages may suddenly realize that the messages have stopped. They may check their phone. They may wonder why the usual contact disappeared. They may reach out first. They may ask whether everything is okay. They may become more attentive simply because the previous pattern has been disrupted. But again, the reaction itself is only information. It does not tell you exactly why the person reacted. This is where people often make a major mistake. They see someone return after being ignored and immediately conclude, "They cannot live without me." That conclusion can be completely wrong. The person may be responding to uncertainty. They may be responding to the loss of attention. They may be checking whether they still have access. They may genuinely miss you. They may have realized that they treated you casually. Or they may simply dislike the feeling of being ignored. Human motivation is rarely explained by one simple reason. That is why the strongest approach is observation rather than assumption. Watch what happens after the initial reaction. Does the person consistently make an effort? Do they become more respectful? Do they communicate clearly? Do they show genuine interest in your life? Do they contribute to the relationship without needing to be chased? Or do they disappear again as soon as they receive reassurance that you are still available? That pattern can tell you much more than the first reaction. Someone who genuinely values the relationship usually shows their interest through repeated behavior. They do not simply return once to confirm that they still have access. They participate. They communicate. They make room. They demonstrate consistency. Someone who mainly misses your attention may return strongly for a short period, receive reassurance, and then return to the same passive behavior. This is why silence can become a diagnostic tool when it comes from healthy emotional distance. You are not using silence to punish someone. You are simply removing your automatic reaction and observing what happens. When you stop filling every gap, the other person has room to reveal their own level of motivation. This can be uncomfortable because you may discover that someone was more attached to your attention than to you. They liked being admired. They liked having someone available. They liked knowing that they could receive emotional support whenever they wanted it. Once that access disappears, their reaction may become intense. But intensity is different from commitment. A dramatic response can show that the change affected them, but it does not prove that they are prepared to build a healthier relationship. This distinction protects you from confusing pursuit with genuine care. It also prevents you from turning silence into a game. If your only goal is to make someone react, you may become addicted to measuring their response. You start checking whether they viewed something. You watch for a message. You analyze the timing. You wonder whether they are jealous. You become dependent on the very attention you were trying to control. That defeats the entire purpose of emotional independence. Healthy silence means you are comfortable whether they respond or they do not. Your goal is clarity, not control. You want to see what happens naturally when you stop forcing the interaction. This is especially important when someone has learned that emotional reactions are easy to trigger. If every disagreement produces a long explanation, they know how to pull you into an argument. If every period of distance produces desperate messages, they know how to create pursuit. If every cold response produces more affection from you, they may learn that withdrawal increases their access to your attention. Breaking that pattern can change the dynamic because the expected reward is no longer automatic. You become less reactive. You pause. You observe. You decide whether a response deserves your energy. This does not make you emotionally unavailable. It makes you emotionally responsible. You can still communicate when communication is necessary. You can still address conflict. You can still express your feelings. The difference is that you refuse to provide endless emotional reactions simply because someone has learned how to provoke them. Over time, this can reveal who is genuinely interested in you and who is mainly interested in what your attention provided. The person who values you will eventually show it through consistent behavior. The person who values only the attention may struggle when that attention is no longer guaranteed. And once the pattern becomes visible, you no longer have to guess as much about what the relationship was built on. Scarcity is one of the most misunderstood ideas in attraction and human behavior because many people confuse being valuable with simply being difficult to reach. They think scarcity means replying late, disappearing for hours, ignoring messages, pretending to be busy, or deliberately creating distance so another person starts wondering where they are. That is performance. Real scarcity is much deeper. It comes from having a life that already contains meaningful priorities. Your time becomes limited because you are actually using it. You have goals that require attention. You have responsibilities that cannot be postponed. You have interests that make you curious. You have friendships that matter. You have personal projects that challenge you. You spend time learning, improving, resting, working, and building a future. Your attention is divided because your life is full, rather than because you are trying to look unavailable. That difference changes the psychological signal completely. When someone pretends to be busy, their behavior often feels forced. They may be staring at their phone while waiting for the perfect amount of time to pass before replying. They may deliberately leave a message unanswered, even though they have nothing else to do. They may post signs of an active life simply to create an impression. This creates a performance that requires constant maintenance. Real independence requires none of that. You simply have priorities. You respond when you genuinely have the time and emotional space to respond. You make plans because you want to make plans. You decline invitations when they conflict with something important. You remain connected without allowing one person to occupy your entire schedule. This can influence perceived value because people often pay closer attention to things that appear limited or difficult to access. But scarcity becomes meaningful only when the underlying value already exists. Making yourself unavailable cannot manufacture qualities you do not possess. If someone becomes distant while offering nothing interesting, nothing trustworthy, and nothing meaningful, the distance alone will rarely create lasting attraction. Scarcity works best when access is limited to something that already feels valuable. That value can come from your personality, your reliability, your emotional stability, your competence, your humor, your kindness, your confidence, or simply the quality of the connection you create. Your time becomes meaningful because you are a meaningful person, not because you are difficult to reach. This is why a genuinely full life can create a different kind of attraction. People can sense when someone has an identity outside the relationship. They can see that your mood does not depend on whether they are available. They can see that your day still has direction when they are busy. They can see that you have things to look forward to that have nothing to do with them. That communicates independence without requiring a single manipulation tactic. The strongest form of scarcity is therefore not withholding yourself. It is having enough substance in your life that your attention cannot be given to everyone at every moment. You are unavailable because you are living, learning, building, and growing. You are not living to appear unavailable. That distinction protects the principle from becoming another dating game. When your life is genuinely full, your attention is selective naturally, and selective attention can feel more valuable because it comes from choice rather than desperation. The person receiving your attention understands that you could spend your time elsewhere, yet you chose to spend part of it with them. That choice can make connection feel more meaningful than constant availability ever could. The strongest form of ignoring is rarely about ignoring people at all. It is about becoming selective with your attention. There is a major difference between refusing to acknowledge someone and choosing carefully where your energy belongs. When you understand that difference, attention stops becoming a tool for control and starts becoming a reflection of your boundaries. You do not need to respond to every message immediately. You do not need to explain every decision. You do not need to remain available simply because someone expects you to be. You can respond when you genuinely have the time, interest, and emotional space to do so. You can say no without creating a long explanation. You can step away from conversations that repeatedly drain you. You can stop chasing people who repeatedly withdraw. You can stop giving endless reassurance to someone who constantly demands proof of your value. None of this requires cruelty. It requires judgment. Your attention is limited, and where you place it shapes your emotional life. When you give the same amount of energy to everyone, including people who disrespect you, manipulate you, or offer nothing in return, you teach them that access to you has no conditions. They can disappear and return whenever they want. They can ignore your needs and still receive your attention. They can give minimal effort and still expect maximum access. Over time, This can create an unhealthy pattern. Selective attention changes that pattern because it introduces boundaries. You begin asking a simple question before investing your energy. Does this interaction deserve my attention? That question can completely change your relationships. Someone who communicates respectfully receives your attention. Someone who makes a genuine effort receives your attention. Someone who supports you during difficult moments receives your attention. Someone who consistently respects your boundaries receives your attention. At the same time, someone who repeatedly disrespects you does not receive unlimited access simply because they demand it. Someone who constantly disappears and returns without explanation does not automatically receive the same emotional investment. Someone who only contacts you when they need something does not have to become a priority in your life. This is where boundaries become attractive, because boundaries communicate self-respect. They show that you can care about people without surrendering control over your time. You can be kind without being endlessly available. You can be generous without allowing people to take advantage of you. You can love someone without chasing them when they repeatedly choose distance. Selective attention also changes the way your communication feels. When you stop talking simply to avoid silence, your words become more intentional. When you stop explaining yourself to everyone, your explanations become more meaningful when they are actually needed. When you stop reacting to every provocation, your reactions can carry more weight. You are no longer giving emotional access automatically. You are choosing where it belongs. This is the real transformation behind the idea of ignoring people. You are not withholding attention to make someone anxious. You are controlling access to your own attention because you understand its value. You are no longer asking, how can I make this person chase me? You are asking, does this person deserve a place in my attention? That shift moves the focus from manipulation to self-respect. It also creates a healthier form of attraction because people can see that your attention has meaning. You give it freely, but you do not give it blindly. You respond because you want, not because you are afraid of losing someone. You stay because the relationship is reciprocal, not because you are terrified of being alone. You walk away when respect disappears because protecting your peace matters more than winning someone's approval. And when your attention becomes selective, your presence can become more meaningful because people understand that access to you comes from mutual connection rather than automatic availability. There is a line between healthy distance and emotional manipulation, and crossing that line can completely change the meaning of your behavior. Taking space can be healthy. Emotional regulation can be healthy. Setting boundaries can be healthy. Choosing to step away from an unhealthy conversation can be healthy. But deliberately ignoring someone to make them anxious, punish them, or force them to chase you is something very different. The behavior may look similar from the outside, but the intention changes everything. Healthy distance comes from self-respect. You step back because you need time to think, because the interaction has become unhealthy, or because you have other priorities that deserve your attention. You do not need the other person to suffer for your decision to have value. You can communicate clearly and then give yourself space. Manipulation works differently. The goal becomes creating an emotional reaction. You want the other person to worry. You want them to feel rejected. You want them to become desperate for your attention. You may deliberately leave messages unanswered, even though you have the ability to respond. You may disappear after an argument because you know the silence will make the other person uncomfortable. You may return only after they become sufficiently anxious. At that point, silence has stopped being a boundary and has become a psychological weapon. Research on ostracism helps explain why this matters. Social exclusion can create genuine psychological distress because human beings have strong needs for belonging, control, and meaningful connection. Being deliberately ignored can leave a person questioning their place in a relationship and wondering why access suddenly disappeared. That emotional uncertainty can be intense. Using that reaction as a strategy may create short-term attention, but it can damage trust and emotional safety over time. This is why the attractive quality is self-control, not cruelty. A person who can remain calm without punishing others communicates stability. A person who needs to create anxiety to feel powerful communicates insecurity. The difference can be seen in the intention behind the silence. Healthy distance says, I need space because I respect myself and I want to handle this properly. Manipulation says, I will remove my attention until you give me the reaction I want. One protects a boundary. The other tries to control another person's emotions. One creates independence. The other creates dependency through uncertainty. This distinction also changes how you should respond. When someone repeatedly disrespects you, you do not need to punish them with silence. You can simply reduce your involvement. You can stop participating in conversations that come disrespectful. You can communicate your boundary once and follow through. You can leave without creating a dramatic final performance. Your goal is not to make the other person regret losing access. Your goal is to protect your own peace. A much stronger position because it does not depend on their reaction. If they become upset, you do not need to celebrate it. If they chase, you do not need to feel victorious. If they move on, you do not need to collapse. Your decision remains valid because it was based on your standards rather than their emotional response. This is where emotional regulation becomes more powerful than manipulation. You can experience anger without using silence as revenge. You can experience disappointment without creating guilt. You can feel rejected without trying to make the other person feel rejected in return. You can walk away without needing the final word. When your behavior comes from self-respect, you are building independence. When your strategy requires another person's pain, you are playing a game. And games eventually create players who are more focused on winning than understanding each other, which can turn attraction into tension and connection into a constant struggle for control. The real reason distance can become attractive has very little to do with making someone chase you, and much more to do with what distance can reveal about the person creating it. Throughout this video, we have seen how reduced availability can create uncertainty, how uncertainty can increase attention, how selective attention can communicate boundaries, and how emotional independence can change the way a person is perceived. But all of these effects become stronger when the distance reflects something real. A person with goals does not need to pretend to be busy, because their goals already require time. A person with standards does not need to threaten people with losing access, because those standards naturally determine who receives their attention. A person who can tolerate rejection does not need to convince someone to stay, because they understand that mutual interest cannot be forced. A person who can walk away does not need to announce their departure dramatically, because they are capable of choosing themselves when a relationship becomes unhealthy. This creates a deeper form of attraction, because it communicates identity. You are more than the relationship. You have interests, values, ambitions, responsibilities, friendships, and personal standards that continue to exist whether someone is paying attention to you or not. That independence can change how people experience your presence. They understand that your attention is something you choose, rather than something you desperately need to give. You can care without clinging. You can love without losing yourself. You can enjoy someone's company without making their approval the foundation of your confidence. This is where distance becomes different from emotional withdrawal. Emotional withdrawal says, I am removing myself because I want you to feel my absence. Independence says, I am continuing to live my life regardless of whether you notice my absence. The second carries far more strength because it does not depend on a reaction. If someone moves closer, you can decide whether their effort deserves your attention. If they remain distant, you can continue forward. If they reject you, you can feel the disappointment without turning it into a crisis. That ability to tolerate rejection is especially important because it shows that your self-worth is coming from within. You do not need to be constantly chosen to believe that you are valuable. You do not need everyone to understand you. You do not need every relationship to work. You can accept that some connections will end while still respecting what they once meant. This creates emotional stability, and emotional stability often feels different from the intensity created by insecurity. Insecurity demands constant confirmation. Independence does not. Insecurity asks, do you still want me? Independence asks, is this relationship healthy and mutual? Insecurity focuses on being chosen. Independence focuses on choosing wisely. That shift can make your presence feel more meaningful because you are no longer giving unlimited access simply to prevent someone from leaving. Your attention becomes intentional. Your time becomes protected. Your relationships become based more on mutual effort than fear. This is also why simply copying the behavior of a distant person will never produce the same effect as genuine independence. Pretending to care less does not make you emotionally independent. Pretending to be unavailable does not create a full life. Delaying every response does not create mystery. Walking away dramatically does not create self-respect. These are behaviors without the foundation behind them. Real attraction grows from what those behaviors are supposed to represent: confidence, stability, purpose, boundaries, and a strong sense of identity. When you have those qualities, you do not need to constantly prove them. People can observe them through your behavior. They notice that you do not collapse when someone becomes distant. They notice that you continue working toward your goals. They notice that you can enjoy connection without becoming dependent on it. They notice that you give attention generously, but selectively. They notice that your life has direction. And slowly, distance stops being a tactic and becomes a natural result of having a life that extends beyond one person. That is the deeper psychological reason people can find independence attractive. It signals that you are connected to yourself before you become consumed by someone else. Your value does not rise because someone chooses you, and it does not disappear because someone walks away. You already have an identity. You already have a direction. You already have a life. When another person enters that life, they become part of something meaningful, rather than becoming the entire meaning of it. And when people sense that difference, they may begin to experience your attention with greater respect, because they understand that your presence is a choice, your time has limits, and your emotional stability does not depend on whether they remain close. The deeper lesson was never about learning how to ignore people. It was about learning how to stop making other people's attention the center of your emotional life. When you constantly chase attention, you give someone else the power to decide how you feel. When you over-explain, you communicate that their approval matters more than your own certainty. When you demand attention, you create pressure instead of connection. When you react from insecurity, you allow temporary emotions to control permanent decisions. And when you pretend to be busy simply to make someone wonder about you, you are still allowing that person to control your behavior. Real independence begins when the performance ends. Stop chasing people who repeatedly make you chase. Stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided to misunderstand you. Stop demanding attention from people who freely choose where they place theirs. Stop responding immediately to every emotional impulse. Give yourself a moment. Breathe. Think. Then decide whether the situation deserves your energy. Build a life that actually makes you busy. Build goals that require your attention. Develop interests that make you forget to check your phone. Strengthen friendships. Learn new skills. Protect your peace. Work on your future. Become comfortable spending time with yourself. Because when your life has meaning beyond another person's approval, your behavior naturally changes. You become less desperate for replies. Become less afraid of rejection. You stop treating every silence like an emergency. You stop measuring your value by who stays and who leaves. You begin giving attention selectively because you understand that your time is part of your life. And this is where the paradox becomes powerful. The person who desperately wants to be noticed can become easy to overlook, but the person who is comfortable being unnoticed can become surprisingly difficult to ignore. They are not performing confidence. They are living it. They do not need to disappear to create mystery. Their life already contains enough depth. They do not need to make people jealous. Their attention is already selective. They do not need to punish anyone with silence. They simply know when to step back. They do not need everyone to choose them because they have learned to choose themselves. That is the real attraction. It is not the attraction created by fear. It is the attraction created by emotional stability, self-respect, independence, and purpose. So remember this: the next time you feel the urge to chase someone who has become distant, pause before you send another message. Ask yourself whether you are reaching out because you genuinely want connection or because you are afraid of losing their attention. Those two motivations can look almost identical from the outside, but they create completely different lives. If you are acting from fear, step back. If you are acting from self-respect, move with clarity. Let people experience the natural consequences of losing access to your attention. If they value you, their actions will eventually reveal it. If they do not, Their absence has given you an answer. Either way, you gain something valuable: clarity. You no longer need to manipulate distance. You no longer need to manufacture scarcity. You no longer need to pretend that you care less than you do. You simply become someone whose attention has value because you give it intentionally. And perhaps that is the most important psychological lesson of all. Do not use distance to make people chase you. Use independence to become someone who never needs to chase. Stop trying so hard to become attractive. Become so grounded, so purposeful, and so comfortable with yourself that attraction becomes a natural result rather than a desperate goal. If this video gave you a new perspective on attention, relationships, emotional control, and human psychology, make sure to like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to our channel for more deep psychology, relationship insights, and powerful ideas about human behavior. Your attention is valuable. Your time is limited. Your life is yours. Choose carefully where you give all three.